Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
The morning sun cut through the oak trees like a blade, casting shadows that danced across my driveway as I stumbled out of my truck, arms loaded with grocery bags. The plastic handles dug into my forearms, milk jug swaying dangerously as I fumbled for my house keys. That's when she appeared, like a storm cloud materializing out of nowhere. Karen Whitmore, 48 years old and built like a linebacker in a designer bathrobe, came charging across her pristine lawn with the fury of a woman who'd found her purpose in life, making mine miserable. "Stop right there!" Her voice cracked like a whip across the quiet neighborhood. She was clutching her phone in one manicured hand, the other pointing at me like I was some common criminal. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a perpetual sneer. "Those groceries don't belong to you anymore. New homeowner association regulation: any items transported across community lawn areas become communal property. You parked on the grass, Matthew. That makes everything you're carrying fair game." I stood there, bags cutting circulation to my fingers, staring at this woman who'd decided my weekly grocery run was her personal goldmine. The absurdity of it hit me like a cold slap. "Excuse me, Karen, I parked 2 inches onto the grass edge. 2 inches. And you think that gives you the right to my food?" But she was already dialing, her fingers flying across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. "This is Karen Whitmore, Homeowner Association President. I need to report a theft in progress at 1247 Elm Street. Yes, theft. The resident is attempting to steal communal property." She looked directly at me as she spoke, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He's become aggressive and threatening when confronted. The lie hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar rage building like pressure in a boiler. This was the same woman who'd had my fence measurements checked 3 times last year, who'd sent me formal complaints about the color of my mailbox being inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. Now she was standing in her bathrobe, telling the police I was a thief and a threat. "You know what you're doing, Karen." My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. "This isn't about regulations. This is about control." She smiled then, and it was the coldest thing I'd seen since Sarah's funeral. "Control? Matthew, this is about community standards, something you've never quite grasped." She gestured toward my house with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. "Some of us actually care about property values." Mary Chen appeared at her front window across the street, her face pressed against the glass. She was 72, lived alone since her husband died, and had been Karen's target twice this year. Once for her unauthorized bird feeder, once for letting her newspapers pile up for 3 days when she had the flu. Mary's eyes met mine through the glass, wide with fear and sympathy. But she didn't open her window. She'd learned, just like the rest of them, that crossing Karen meant becoming her next project. Sam Rodriguez came jogging around the corner, 16 years old and all elbows and attitude, earbuds dangling around his neck. He slowed when he saw the scene unfolding on my driveway, a grin spreading across his face like this was the most entertainment he'd had all week. "Yo, Mr. Brennan, you in trouble with the grocery police?" He laughed at his own joke, but when Karen turned her laser focus on him, his smile faltered. "Hey, Samuel, I'll need you to witness what you've seen here," Karen said, her voice taking on that sweet, authoritative tone she used when she needed something. "Mr. Brennan was attempting to remove stolen property from community grounds. You saw him acting aggressively toward me, didn't you?" The kid looked between Karen and me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Karen had power in this neighborhood. She could make life easy or miserable depending on which side you chose. His mother worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford to deal with harassment over property violations. "I mean, I saw him carrying groceries," Sam said carefully. "And you guys were talking." "Talking?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "He was threatening me, Samuel, making me fear for my safety." She looked back at her phone as sirens began wailing in the distance. The police will be here any moment. I suggest you think carefully about what you witnessed. The grocery bags felt like concrete blocks in my arms. My shoulders ached, but I couldn't set them down. Not now, not with Karen standing there like a vulture waiting for roadkill. The sirens grew louder, and I realized this wasn't just about groceries anymore. This was about Karen establishing her dominance, showing the entire neighborhood what happened to anyone who didn't fall in line. I thought about Sarah then, about how she used to laugh when I'd get worked up about stupid neighborhood politics. "They're just people, Matt," she'd say. Scared, small people trying to feel big. But Sarah had never met Karen Whitmore. Sarah had never stood in a driveway holding groceries while someone tried to steal not just her food, but her dignity. The police cruiser rounded the corner, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't going to end with a simple misunderstanding. Karen had made sure of that. She'd escalated this beyond reason, beyond sanity, into something that would mark me in this neighborhood forever. The thought of it, of being labeled a thief, a threat, made my hands shake. 2 officers got out of the car, both young enough to be my sons. The taller one, a Latino guy with sergeant stripes, approached with his hand resting casually on his belt. "Ma'am, we got a call about a theft in progress." Karen immediately launched into her performance, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man has been threatening me and attempting to steal communal property. I tried to reason with him, but he became belligerent and aggressive." "Sir, we're going to need you to set those bags down," the shorter officer said, his voice professionally neutral but firm. I looked at those bags, my milk, my bread, the sandwich meat I'd planned for lunch, the ice cream Sarah used to love that I still bought out of habit, and felt something break inside me. "These are my groceries. I bought them 20 minutes ago. I have the receipt." "The receipt doesn't matter," Karen interjected. "Community regulations clearly state that any property transported across designated lawn areas becomes subject to redistribution protocols." The sergeant looked confused. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with any law that would make someone's groceries community property because they walked on grass." Karen's smile never wavered. "Officer, I'm the president of the homeowner association. I'm well versed in local property law and community standards. Perhaps you should check with your supervisor about jurisdictional authority in planned communities." I watched the officers exchange glances, and I could see them doing the math. A domestic dispute over groceries in a middle-class neighborhood wasn't worth getting entangled in property law complexities. Easier to diffuse the situation and move on to real crimes. "Sir, why don't we start with seeing that receipt?" the sergeant said. As I reached for my wallet, still balancing the bags, I caught Sam Rodriguez looking at me with something that might have been respect. Mary Chen was still at her window, her hand pressed against the glass like she was trying to reach through it, and Karen stood there in her bathrobe, arms crossed, waiting for her victory. That's when I realized this wasn't just about groceries or property lines or even Karen's need for control. This was about something deeper, something I'd been running from since Sarah died. It was about standing up or lying down, about being a man or being a victim. And as I pulled out that receipt with hands that no longer shook, I made a decision that would change everything. The receipt crinkled in my fingers as I handed it to the sergeant, but Karen was already 3 steps ahead. "Officers, I need to show you something," she said, pulling out her phone with the practiced ease of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. "I've been documenting Mr. Brennan's increasingly erratic behavior for months now." She swiped through her phone, and I felt my stomach drop as she showed the screen to the officers. There I was, captured in a dozen photos and videos. Me working in my yard at 6 in the morning. Me carrying trash bags to the curb a day early. Me talking animatedly to my neighbor Bob about his new fence. In Karen's curated collection, every normal activity looked suspicious. Every gesture appeared threatening. "This is harassment documentation," she explained, her voice taking on that clinical tone she used at homeowner association meetings. "Pattern of aggressive behavior, property violations, and now this theft attempt. I've been afraid to confront him directly, but community safety demanded action." The shorter officer studied the photos while the sergeant examined my receipt. I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. Not about Karen's story, but about the time they were wasting on this nonsense. Still, the photos were damning in their accumulated mundanity. In Karen's hands, my life looked like evidence of instability. "Ma'am, these photos show normal activities," the sergeant said carefully. "Taking out trash, yard work." "At inappropriate times," Karen interrupted. "Disturbing the peace with power tools before 7 a.m., violating community guidelines repeatedly. And look at this one." She swiped to a video of me arguing with the cable installer last month when he had blocked my driveway for 3 hours. "Verbal aggression towards service personnel." I watched my own face on that tiny screen, red with frustration, gesturing wildly as I'd tried to explain to a guy who didn't speak English that I needed to get to Sarah's grave before the cemetery closed. In Karen's narrative, I wasn't a widower having a bad day. I was a dangerous neighbor spiraling out of control. "The receipt checks out," the sergeant said, handing it back to me. "These are his groceries, ma'am, purchased this morning at Miller's Market." But Karen had an answer for that too. "The purchase is irrelevant, officer. Community property law supersedes individual ownership when violations occur. I have documentation of every homeowner association meeting where these policies were established." She gestured toward my truck, still parked with 2 wheels barely touching the grass edge. "Unauthorized parking on community green space triggers the redistribution clause." The absurdity of it would have been funny if it weren't destroying my life in real time. Sam Rodriguez had pulled out his own phone and was recording everything, probably planning to post it on whatever social media platform kids use these days. Mary Chen had disappeared from her window, but I could see her porch light flicking on and off, her way of showing support without taking sides. "Sir, is there somewhere else you can park?" the shorter officer asked me, clearly trying to find a middle ground. "It's my driveway," I said, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. "I've parked there for 12 years. My wife used to park there. The previous HOA president never had an issue with it." "Previous administrations were lax about enforcement," Karen said smoothly. "I've brought professionalism and accountability to this position. Community standards exist for a reason." That's when Trevor Whitmore came jogging around the corner, Karen's 19-year-old son, returning from his morning run. He was built like his mother, thick and aggressive. But where Karen's aggression came wrapped in passive-aggressive policy talk, Trevor's was pure physical intimidation. He'd played football in high school until he got kicked off the team for starting fights, and he'd never quite figured out what to do with all that suppressed violence. "Mom, what's going on?" He pulled out his earbuds, sweat still dripping from his shaved head. "Trevor, perfect timing," Karen said, her voice warming with maternal pride. "I need you to witness what you see here. Mr. Brennan has stolen community property and become threatening when confronted." Trevor looked at me, holding my grocery bags, looked at the police officers, and I could see him making the same calculation Sam had made earlier. But unlike Sam, Trevor had nothing to lose and everything to gain by siding with his mother. "Yeah, I saw him grab those bags real aggressive-like," Trevor said, his voice carrying the same authority Karen used when she wanted something. "Looked like he was going to swing them at Mom when she tried to stop him." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Even the officers looked uncomfortable with how smoothly it rolled off his tongue. But lies told confidently by multiple witnesses start to carry weight, especially when they confirm existing suspicions. "That's completely false," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I never threatened anyone." "Yes, sir, we're going to need you to calm down," the sergeant said, and I realized that my denials were being interpreted as agitation. Karen stepped closer to the officers, lowering her voice like she was sharing a confidence. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. The aggressive response when challenged. I've tried to work with him through proper channels, but his behavior has become increasingly erratic since his wife passed. The mention of Sarah hit me like a physical blow. Karen had weaponized my grief, turned my worst pain into evidence of my instability. I felt something crack inside my chest, a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "Don't," I said, and the word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't you dare bring my wife into this." "See," Karen said, taking a theatrical step backward. "This is what I mean, volatile, unpredictable reactions." The officers were looking at me differently now, and I could see the situation shifting. What had started as a ridiculous dispute over groceries was becoming something more serious. Karen had painted me as an unstable widower, and every word I said to defend myself only seemed to confirm her narrative. That's when Bob Martinez appeared at his front door. Bob was 62, retired from the fire department, and the closest thing to a friend I had left in this neighborhood. He'd helped me fix my roof after the storm last year, had brought me casseroles in those dark weeks after Sarah's funeral. If anyone would speak up for me, it would be Bob. "Everything okay over here?" Bob called out, but he stayed on his porch, safe distance, neutral territory. "Bob, thank God," Karen said, turning toward him with relief. "Could you please tell the officers what you've observed about Mr. Brennan's behavior lately, the incidents we discussed?" My heart sank as I watched Bob's face change. Whatever Karen was referring to, whatever private conversation they had had, Bob looked uncomfortable being put on the spot. He glanced at me, then at the officers, then back at Karen. "Well, I mean," Bob started, then stopped. "Matt's been having a tough time since Sarah died. We all have tough times." "But you told me about the late-night noise," Karen pressed. "The arguing with himself, the—" "Karen, I think maybe we should let the officers handle this," Bob said. But the damage was done. The suggestion that I'd been talking to myself, making noise, having problems, it all fed into Karen's narrative of declining mental state. I stood there holding my groceries, watching my life being dissected by someone who'd turned neighborhood gossip into a weapon. The officers were whispering to each other, probably calling for backup or checking my record for priors. Sam Rodriguez was still filming, and I realized this whole scene was going to live forever on the internet. The ice cream was starting to melt through the bag, cold liquid dripping onto my shoes. Such a small detail, but it felt like everything, my inability to protect even the simplest things, my failure to maintain control over my own life. Sarah used to joke that I could fix any problem with enough planning and persistence. She never met a problem like Karen Whitmore. "Officers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to take my groceries inside my house. That's all I've ever wanted to do." But as I said it, I realized it wasn't true anymore. What I wanted now was something else entirely, something that had been building in my chest like a pressure cooker since the moment Karen had made that phone call. What I wanted was to show this woman that she'd picked the wrong target, chosen the wrong fight, underestimated the wrong man. The sergeant was about to respond when Karen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, and her face lit up with triumph. "Perfect," she said, answering the call on speaker. "This is the Homeowner Association Board President. Yes, I'm here with the situation we discussed. The police are present. Yes, I think we should proceed with the emergency action." She hung up and looked at the officers with satisfaction. "Gentlemen, the Homeowner Association Board has just voted to implement emergency protocols. Mr. Brennan's parking violation and threatening behavior constitute a clear and present danger to community safety. We're formally requesting his immediate removal from association property pending a full hearing." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Not just the groceries now, they wanted me out of my home. And that's when I realized Karen had never been playing for groceries at all. The words emergency removal echoed in my head like a death sentence. I stood there watching Karen's satisfied smile, holding grocery bags that had somehow become evidence of my unfitness to exist in my own neighborhood. The officers were looking uncomfortable now, caught between a property dispute they didn't understand and a woman who spoke their language of official procedures and emergency protocols. "Ma'am, we can't remove someone from their own property based on a homeowner association vote," the sergeant said carefully. "That would require a court order." But Karen was ready for that too. "Officer, I have documentation here of escalating violations dating back 6 months, noise complaints, property maintenance issues, and now theft and threatening behavior. The association has legal authority to enforce community standards pending formal resolution." She was pulling papers from a folder that had appeared from nowhere, spreading them across the hood of the police car like a prosecutor presenting evidence. I caught glimpses of my own signature on documents I barely remembered signing, forms from when Sarah and I had first moved in, back when we thought HOA meant neighborhood barbecues and Christmas decorations. That's when something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the sight of my own handwriting being used against me. Or maybe it was the way Trevor smirked while filming everything on his phone. But suddenly I wasn't the exhausted widower being pushed around by bureaucratic bullies. I was the guy who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, who'd rebuilt engines with his bare hands, who'd held his wife's hand through 18 months of chemotherapy without breaking. "You know what, Karen?" I said, setting the grocery bags down carefully on my own driveway. "You're absolutely right about one thing. This isn't about groceries anymore." I pulled out my own phone, scrolling through contacts until I found what I was looking for. Mary Chen's number. She'd given it to me after Sarah's funeral, told me to call if I ever needed anything. Sweet, frightened Mary, who watched everything from behind her curtains. "Mary, it's Matt Brennan," I said when she answered. "I need you to do something for me. Remember that conversation you and I had about Karen's late-night visitors? The ones who come around when her husband's out of town?" Karen's face went white. "What are you doing?" "Mary, could you tell these officers about those visitors? The ones who park in the same grass spot I just used? The ones who stay until 3 in the morning?" I looked directly at Karen as I spoke. "Especially the young man who's been coming around twice a week since April, the one who's definitely not her son." The silence that followed was beautiful. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Trevor stopped filming, confusion replacing his smirk as he looked between his mother and me. "Matt, I don't know what you're suggesting, but," Bob started. "I'm not suggesting anything, Bob. I'm just asking Mary to share what she's observed, same as Karen asked you to do." I kept my voice calm, conversational. "Mary, are you still there?" Mary's voice came through the phone speaker, thin but clear. "Yes, Matt, I've seen the car. Blue sedan, license plate starting with GXT. Usually arrives around 11 p.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays." Karen lunged for my phone, but the sergeant stepped between us. "Ma'am, please step back." "This is harassment," Karen shrieked. "He's making things up, trying to defame me because he knows he's caught." But Trevor was staring at his mother with a look I recognized, the same look I'd had when I found out my first wife was cheating, pieces clicking into place, explanations for things that hadn't made sense before. "A blue sedan," Trevor said slowly, "like the one parked behind the community center when you said you were at board meetings." "Trevor, don't listen to this," Karen said, but her voice had lost that commanding authority. "He's trying to manipulate you." I handed my phone to Mary's voice could continue. "The man is approximately 30, dark hair, athletic build. He never stays past 3 a.m., and he always parks in the same spot, the exact same grass area where Mr. Brennan parked today." The sergeant was looking at Karen with new interest. "Ma'am, is this true? Are there regular parking violations by other residents that go unenforced?" "That's completely irrelevant to this situation," Karen said, but she was backing toward her house now. "Actually, it's extremely relevant," I said, feeling steadier than I had in months. "Because if Karen's been selectively enforcing rules based on personal convenience, then her entire case against me falls apart." I looked at Sam Rodriguez, who was still filming everything. Sam, you've lived here for 3 years. Have you ever seen Karen enforce the grass parking rule before today? Sam lowered his phone, thinking. Honestly, no, man. My mom parks on the grass all the time when she gets home from her night shift. Mrs. Whitmore never said anything. Because she couldn't, I continued, turning back to the officers. Because Karen's been using that same spot for her late-night meetings. She couldn't report parking violations without exposing her own activities. Karen's face had gone from white to red to purple. This is defamation, slander. I'm calling my lawyer. Please do, I said. And while you're at it, maybe explain to your husband why you need a lawyer to discuss your Tuesday and Friday evening activities. That's when Trevor stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he was going to take a swing at me. Instead, he looked at his mother with disgust. The board meetings that run until midnight, he said. The emergency sessions that happen twice a week. The times you come home with your clothes different than when you left. Trevor, don't... Shut up, Mom. Trevor's voice was quiet, but it cut through Karen's protestations like a knife. Just shut up. He turned to the officers. My dad's been working extra shifts to pay for her HOA president expenses. The hotel meetings, the conference calls, the office supplies. She told him it was all for the community. He looked back at Karen with something close to hatred. How long has this been going on? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. The sergeant cleared his throat. Ma'am, regardless of any personal issues, we still need to address the original complaint about theft. I picked up my grocery bags. Officer, these are my groceries, purchased with my money on my receipt. Karen attempted to steal them using fraudulent HOA authority. If anyone should be charged here, it's her. That's not... I have every right, Karen started, but her voice trailed off as she realized how it sounded. Bob finally stepped off his porch. Matt, I'm sorry about what I said earlier. Karen asked me to report some things, but I think maybe I misunderstood the situation. Mary Chen appeared at her front door, still clutching her phone. Mr. Brennan, I have photos of the car, the license plate, the times. I keep track of everything for security reasons. I looked around at my neighbors, Sam nodding supportively, Bob looking ashamed but determined, Mary brave enough to stand in her doorway. Even some faces I didn't recognize peering from windows and porches, drawn by the commotion. Karen, I said, my voice carrying across the morning air. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go inside your house. You're going to resign from the HOA board. And you're going to stay away from me and my property. You can't make me... Yes, I can. I held up my phone, showing the recording app that had been running since I'd called Mary. Because if you don't, every person in this neighborhood is going to hear exactly what kind of president they've been following. Karen looked around at the faces watching her. Neighbors she'd bullied, intimidated, and controlled for 2 years. She saw the doubt in their eyes, the questions forming, the authority she'd built crumbling like a house of cards. Without another word, she turned and walked toward her house, her bathrobe trailing behind her like a defeated flag. Trevor watched her go, then looked at me. Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry about the lies, about all of it. You did what you thought you had to do, I said. We all did. The officers packed up their notebooks, shaking their heads about domestic disputes and HOA politics. As they drove away, I stood in my driveway holding my groceries, the same groceries that had started this whole mess. But something had changed, not just with Karen, though I suspected her reign of terror was over. Something had changed in me. For the first time since Sarah died, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I'd claimed my place and defended it. Bob walked over and helped me carry the bags to my door. Matt, about what I said earlier? Forget it, Bob. We all got caught up in her game. As I unlocked my front door, I looked back at the neighborhood. Sam was explaining everything to some friends who'd arrived on bikes. Mary was still standing in her doorway, waving. A few other neighbors were coming outside, probably planning to compare notes about their own Karen stories. I thought about Sarah then, about what she would have said about all this. She'd have laughed at the absurdity of it, but she'd have been proud too. Proud that I'd stood up not just for myself, but for the kind of community she'd always wanted us to live in. The ice cream had melted completely by the time I got inside, but that was okay. Some things are worth sacrificing for something better. I had my groceries, my dignity, and my home. And Karen Whitmore had learned that sometimes the quiet guy in the corner isn't as easy to break as he looks.